Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today for the fourth installment of the five-part webinar series, Know Your Audience, the Importance of Analytics in Building a Strong Development Program. Today's webinar is co-presented by Brad Manuel, Analytics Consultant, and Farah Salim, Consulting Associate. Brad joined GG+A in 2011, bringing to the firm more than 15 years of experience in development, wealth screening, and analytics. Prior to joining the firm, Brad most recently served as Senior Account Executive with WealthEngine.com, where he was a top sales representative and managed a portfolio of more than 100 prospects. Brad's co-presenter, Farah, joined GG+A in January 2012 after previously serving as the Executive Director for the Kidsium of Health and Science, an emerging children's museum in Springfield, Illinois. Our presenters welcome any questions you have during today's session and will answer those questions in the time remaining at the end of the hour. To address a question to Brad and Farah, please use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. Select all participants from the drop-down menu and send us your questions. Any questions we do not answer today will be followed up in a message we send next week. We will send a recording of the session along with the presentation slides, as well as a short survey to gain your feedback on the webinar. Thank you again for joining us today. I will now turn it over to Farah to get us started.
Thanks, Catherine. Well, we are very excited, Brad and I, to welcome you to Know Your Audience, the Importance of Analytics in Building a Strong Development Program, which basically means knowing who your target audience is as your critical constituency, which is the best strategy because it's the most cost-effective strategy, which we're going to talk about a little bit later into the presentation. But first, I wanted to put in a little plug for our final installment of our webinar series for small development shops, and that's happening on April 12th, and it's about best practices for boards of directors. So learning the tips and tricks not only to acquire effective board members, but how to get them to serve your organization effectively throughout their tenure. So that's coming up. But today what we're going to talk about in terms of our agenda are a couple of questions to ask and to actualize about data. Why are you collecting and segmenting your data? Who are you trying to reach? What data do you have to capture in order to reach those people? When should you collect data? How do you take that data and analyze it to maximize results for your particular organization? And how to take all of that information and to utilize it. Mainly here what we've mentioned is major gift portfolios, but how to take all types of constituents and move them into that smaller pool, if you will, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And we know that this webinar is really, really incredibly important because it costs less to retain a current donor than it does to cultivate a new one. So we're going to try to keep that in mind as we go through these slides. But let's start with why are you collecting data? The reasons that your organization is collecting data is obviously pertinent to figuring out the methods and the ways that you actually analyze them. Are you collecting data because it's what you've always done, it's what your predecessor did, and no one can really remember why? Or are you collecting data because a particular board member has asked you randomly for a certain trend and you appease him or her because that's what you do for board members? So now to talk and dive a little bit more into this, Brad will talk about segmenting.
Thank you, Farah. And just to start off, we're trying to focus on smaller development shops. And I got my start in fundraising a long time ago, about 20 years ago, working for a foundation down in Florida, and I was the development shop. I did everything. I did the writing and the PR and soliciting for smaller gifts. So I certainly understand where anyone's coming from on the phone. And even when I worked at a university, we didn't have the largest staff. So what we tried to do was focus this webinar around ideas for a shop, less than 10 people, even down to one person, and what you can do to maximize the data you have, get new data, et cetera. And we wanted to start with the beginning of the process, which is, why are you deciding to segment your data? I know a lot of people just segment for segmenting's sake, which is fine, I guess, but if you have a pool of data and you know where you're going with it, that's always a nice start. It could be a single event. You just have an event, you know that it's going to be for families, people with children, partners with children. that's an easy one. So you know exactly what you want to do. There's not a lot that you have to decide on. You can just pull out the families, the people with children, if you have that segmented, married people. Maybe you have an event that's going to be more driven towards women, so you can segment your database that way. So knowing why you want to segment your database can sometimes drive your process. Is it a mini campaign? Are you looking at a building or a project that only speaks to a certain constituency of your college, so just the engineering graduates? Easy to segment that out. All the way down to you're about to have a campaign, whether it's a big, huge $4 billion campaign or just a $1 million campaign for a smaller shop, you're going to want to segment out your wealth, and we're going to talk about the different ways that you can do that. I even was working with a client that asked me for data to overlay because they got a new vice president, like Farah said, and that new vice president had an idea and wanted to go to a whole new direction with who they were going to solicit. So it's not always a campaign or an event. It can just be that you got new leadership that has decided they want to start soliciting a different group of people. So really look at why you're doing this, and it might lead you down that path pretty easily.
So that path will hopefully move your organization to figuring out who you're trying to reach. That is the critical constituency. We are calling the major gifts pool, or the good big donors in the middle circle, which we'll talk about a little bit later, as our critical constituency for nonprofit organizations. And those are the ones that you really want to spend the most time cultivating, stewarding, basically massaging and becoming more engaged with your organization. As we all know, this information comes from exactly what Brad was talking about, the why. Real fundraising growth from year to year comes from building and upgrading your current donors. And, try to avoid chasing those donors for the possibility of that one big gift or that holy grail of a $1 million+ gift. So right now, we will move to taking what we call an internal audience review.
Thank you, Farah. So we've talked about the why are you segmenting, and now let's look at the different ways that people are going to segment, determining a reasonable, relevant target. So I mentioned earlier that you might want to invite women to a particular event. Well, if you have a database of 15,000 and you look at how many might be women and it's 8,000, that's probably not a good idea to invite to a smaller event. So you're going to want to start targeting towards a relevant audience for whatever you're looking at. So an event, decide how many people you want to invite and start making cutoffs. Are they going to be donors in the last year or so? Are they going to be donors at a certain level in the last year or two? Is it going to be women or men, or is it going to be anyone that meets that threshold? A lot of times you can look at your mission, your clients, your programs to start segmenting deeper and deeper if you want to get a smaller number. And then we also, when we're looking for major donors, not necessarily an event, we like to look at historical information. And so I did a webinar earlier, and a lot of the questions came from nonprofits and social services groups that don't have a wealth of information to work with. They aren't universities that can give Social Security numbers going back 40 years. You really have giving to work with, and that's more or less what I'm talking about when I say, let's look at historical data. Look at your donors for the last year. Look at your donors over the last 3 to 5 years and see if you can see any kind of trend that has formed from the large donors. A very easy one, and one that I suggest everyone do, is go to a website, and we'll send this out when we do the webinar. I'm sorry it's not on the slide, called VATCHGEO, VATCHGEO.com, and there are a lot of map points. It's a mapping program. So take a group of people, maybe your donors over the last 3 years, maybe the last 5 years, and put them in a spreadsheet, put them on this website, and it literally is going to map your donors and see if there are any geographic targets. See if people give to you that live in a 3-mile radius. We did this recently for a community college, and what was happening, we did a project for them, found out that a lot of people are non-degreed alumni that we came back and said, these people are great prospects for you. And they were looking at us saying, non-degree alumni at a community college are our good prospect pool. As we dove deeper, we realized it was the senior education program. So all the people that lived within 5 years that were doing continuing ed, that were stopping by at night to take a class on Shakespeare or something like that, these were all wealthy, retired people that lived in the area, and as they mapped out who we brought back to the prospect list, as they looked at the data more, we had actually uncovered an entire new prospect pool for them. They had never looked at non-donor alumni as any sort of opportunity. They had always looked at alumni or civic-minded people that aren't associated with the university. So go to BatchGeo, go to any other mapping program, and just see if there are any sort of wealthy zip codes that are targeting that you might be able to see a pattern. It's very simple things like that. Look at your board members. Look at clients. Clients, what I'm referring to are those senior lifelong learners that are taking classes maybe. Talk to your volunteers and do peer screenings. Talk to people. Say, you know, do you think this would be popular in your neighborhood? Is there anyone that we should talk to? So by doing a lot of these segmenting procedures, you can actually grow your pool. Certainly, you're engaging your current donors, as Farah's talking about, getting them more involved, but then you're also uncovering more by segmenting and working your way out from there.
And to piggyback on kind of diving deeper and seeing whether you are chasing those new donors or you're actually looking back throughout your history for your organization, I highly recommend that you perform, and it doesn't have to be this basic, it can be a little bit more in-depth, but performing a 5-year review of new donor versus lapsed donor. Obviously, as we know, we can focus on total dollars for a fundraising budget, but when you really drill down and see what you might have potentially lost with cultivating new donors versus soliciting current donors, it can be surprising at some point. So reflect back on your organization's performance for the last 5 years. Have you really grown? And I did want to share a couple of statistics which I found extremely interesting. In 2011, the Fundraising Effectiveness Project report showed that for every $5.35 that respondent organizations raised from the previous year, from 2010, $5.54 was lost through attrition. So basically, if you look at the big picture, they actually had a negative growth rate, and no nonprofit organization wants to be in that situation, even though to their board it was great to present a bigger dollar number, if you will. So really look down and perform this internal audit and see how you fare in terms of donor attrition and how to basically understand who your critical constituency is in order to not only stop losing current donors, but to also pad that with new donors. So let's move on to what Brad had mentioned. Do not collect data just for data's sake. Do not collect data for that board member who thinks it might be really neat to know how many donors have more than 2 dogs. Think of relevant points in terms of data to collect for your particular organization, knowing that your organization is extremely different and unique compared to other organizations for the types of data that they collect. Your target audience is what should drive your prospect pool and your data, not the other way around. And I think that sometimes organizations can spend way too much time and resources on trying to collect that data and to fill in the information when really they need to be utilizing the information a little bit better, which of course we'll give you tips on at the end of our presentation. And, you know, some ideas that I had when I was trying to think of examples of obsolete pieces of information or data to collect, something like pager numbers in this day and age. Why? You don't need that. Or some other ideas that I had that you're just kind of depending upon your critical constituency, spinning your wheels is mailing addresses for second or third vacation homes. So really focus what your data needs to search for. And Brad will talk about who maybe not your prospect.
And I actually had an interesting segmenting story, and that Farah reminded me of because she talked about 2 dogs, and we get to work with a lot of interesting organizations here. And I was talking to one that is a service dog organization, and they found this segment out just by talking to their donors, and it ended up that so it was a organization that works with dogs, trains dogs, and they found out that half of their donors loved dogs, and the only reason they gave to the organization was because they loved dogs. And half of their donors, I don't know if it was exact 50-50 split, liked the people that were served by the animals. So they had a problem in messaging in that if you do an annual report, how do you focus? How do you approach donors? They ended up splitting the organization in 2 and doing 2 nonprofits, and it wasn't just a simple decision like that, but it's fascinating that they could segment so greatly that they found they needed 2 organizations to serve those needs. And it's just, when I was talking with her, I was fascinated by this because she said that you would talk to the dog-type donor, and they would get an annual report, and they wouldn't even see the people. They would just start talking about the dogs and how wonderful the dogs are. And when they talked to the other side of the coin, they didn't worry about the dogs so much. They literally were just worried about the veterans or the disabled people that we were talking to, that they were talking or the dogs were helping. So you could see that segmenting isn't always just running a regression analysis. It is talking to your donors, talking to the people that you're working with to see what patterns emerge from that. So it's not always as simple as slicing and dicing the data, although as an analytics consultant, I certainly push that as a great idea. So what we want to talk about here with Oprah's Not Your Prospect is, having worked at a university in Chicago at one point, Oprah had given to our university once, 10 or 15 years prior to me showing up, and every time we ran any kind of analysis, she would pop up as one of our top prospects, and she was never going to give it to us again. But the vice president, and if there are vice presidents on the line, I don't mean to speak ill of vice presidents, she would always say, well, we can't just throw Oprah away. We've got to have her assigned, or we've got to try at least. It's Oprah. And so what we want to talk about with this slide is when you segment and you find an anomaly like that, where it just doesn't make sense. Another example, we had a birthday party for a wealthy board member, and he invited a lot of his wealthy friends. They all ended up in our database as well. And they were all donors because we counted the birthday gifts as donations. Look at some of these trends and say, all these wealthy people are wealth screening or rating off the scale, but they haven't given to us in 4 years. They all seem to give on June 15th for $1,000. There's a reason for that. So as you start segmenting, realize Bill Gates, Oprah, they're probably not your prospects. Even if they gave you some money 7 or 8 years ago, you're going to want to segment those people out and not waste your time. And we're going to talk about that later on spending your money wisely, and because that's such a precious resource at this point. The other thing you might want to look at when you're segmenting, and we talk about this a lot around the table, analytics, you can see we're a lot of fun, is look for reasons why you might be getting that information. So if you're looking for plan donors and you pull out all your current plan donors and they're all current or former board members, there's something there that's saying, well, maybe we only ask board members for planned gifts. It doesn't mean that if you make somebody a board member, now they're a good planned giving prospect. So if you notice that women are your large, and I keep saying women because women and men, that's an easy segment that everyone can understand. If you notice that women give a lot more than men, look at what you've been doing over the last 2 years to see, well, have we been focusing on women? Does it make sense that that is what's happening? Don't assume that women are the only ones interested in your cause or your nonprofit. So it might be that they are, and that's a good segment, but it might not be a good path to continue on because you are excluding half of the population. So whenever we do segmentation, whenever you do, just look at it and make sure that it's making sense and there's not some underlying reason as to why you're pulling those people out. So we call that a litmus test on does the segmentation make sense, because again, it's not always just slicing the data and moving forward based on that analysis. You should always look at it and say, well, why did that happen potentially, so you're not making mistakes as you get on the road. And this is something I actually learned, this slide, from a webinar I did about 4 or 5 months ago, and I'm actually going to recommend that if people are interested in communication strategies on this, they might want to go back and look at that. It was called Communication Strategy and Segmenting. But we talked, one of the consultants had worked at a university, and everyone always thinks, oh, universities have all the information, they can segment, et cetera. And he was a communication specialist, and he said, they have a lot of information, but none of it was useful to me. I don't care about graduation years as much as I care about who is on the freshman year dorm. Who can I spearhead, who can I use to communicate to people? I want to know who the popular professors are. So what he really drove forward in this webinar, and what I think, what I want to say here is, if you don't have information that you think you want, yes, complain about it, and then pay it forward as much as you can. And sit down as a group, or if you're a one-person shop like I was, say, what do I really want in 5 years? And if I'm not here, at least the person that is here in 5 years will have that type of information. And it could be anything. If you're, then again, a lot of NPOs, social services, nonprofits, they don't get a lot of the deep information. So maybe you can start getting that. Maybe you can add an age box on any sort of donation that you give, an age range. Maybe you can put a marital status or children, or talk to people. You know, it's easy to say, well, we don't get that, we only get donations. But see how you can start getting that extra information. Farrah's going to talk a little later about, you can go out and buy all of this, absolutely. But what about the information you can't buy? Start figuring out what's relevant to your organization and figure out a way to get that, not for next month or even next year, but for 5 years when you're going to have enough of that information to make it worthwhile to your organization. So everybody says pay it forward in the nonprofit world. You should worry about paying forward your data collection for the next generation of fundraisers at your organization.
And I think that's very important and a great transition to show when to hold them and when to fold them, meaning you have to look at the bigger picture. As Brad was talking about, looking at the data in terms of the pieces, you don't also want to piece together the parts. You want to look at the whole pie, if you will. And I thought that this section that Brad and I will talk about is really relevant because it's habit forming. And it's very hard for us in our day-to-day lives at work to carve out time for things like taking notes on when you met with a donor, or just passing comments that you heard from a coworker, if you have a coworker in your small shop, who has spoken to a donor, who has spoken to a volunteer, or who has spoken to a client. So really, some of these are suggestions of what we consider investing your time. Yes, it will take a little bit more time, but I think that we all agree that taking that time to really pad your numbers and your data is going to benefit not only you, but your organization at the end of the day. So just going through a couple, we have some suggestions. Brad had mentioned special events in terms of after the birthday party. And again, keep in mind that all of these people may be in different pools, in different circles, if you will, and they may be concentric circles. But I think that it is important at least to have that information while it's still fresh in your mind, or, you know, if you overheard at so-and-so is going to be traveling to a certain place and you are a nonprofit organization that has programs in that certain location, it might be good information to have when talking to that person as a potential donor. So keep good notes. Be able to communicate your conversations or your overhearing conversations so that, as Brad mentioned, other people can understand and translate them as applicable to approaching them and cultivating them. Also, another great time is to look at collecting data and storing it in a well-organized manner after an annual review. Or also, and this makes a lot of sense, right before a major direct mail piece or a communications piece that's sent out, which you obviously want to customize as best as you can and as often as you can. Really common sense, you should collect and update and store your data when mail bounces back. It sounds like a simple concept, but again, going back to carving out that time, make sure that everyone in your shop acknowledges that that is an investment and worth their time to update the mailing addresses, because a donor cannot come if they do not know about an event. Of course, before and after appointments with leaders, board members, major gift donors, this goes without saying that these are most likely part of your critical constituency. And then volunteer engagements. I think that I have found in my past that volunteers have been gems in terms of becoming more engaged, and also as they go through life with the organization, there are more opportunities for them as you cultivate them. They will stick around for those capital campaigns. They will stick around for those special events. So don't overlook your volunteers. I know that when I worked at a hospital in Illinois, in Springfield, Illinois, volunteers made up a big part of this children's health organization that I worked for as part of the hospital. And really going and engaging and tapping into the volunteers' passion, they were more apt to writing bigger checks because they saw and they grew with the families that they helped. With the sick and injured kids, it's more than just a saying. They saw the families. They became very intimate with the families. And so really look to see about your volunteer base. Another great time is just those basic milestones. Even just keeping up with the local news, I think is a really good way to ensure that your data, you have the most up-to-date information. And with that, a great time is spring, which it is now in sunny Chicago, to do some spring data cleaning.
And we, this goes back to, and it'll sound like I'm harping on the Oprah analogy or the birthday situation, but it is important for you to get rid of information and that isn't helping the organization and that might lead you in the wrong direction. Typically, when people do wealth screenings or they're doing projects with analytics or predictive modeling, you send everyone in your organization, and you'll get talked into sending everybody at the organization, which is fine in a way, but it's also, you need to realize that some of the people that might get rated highly don't necessarily have any interest in your organization anymore. And I'll use the example with higher ed. They don't use parents once the kids have graduated, unless they have already engaged them in some way. In some meaningful way, if you had a child attending a university 3 years ago, you didn't give while the child was there, you gave a small amount, you haven't given since they left, universities aren't going to target you as a great opportunity for fundraising down the road, at least not at a high level. So it's very important to learn from the traditionally great fundraisers, which have been the colleges and universities in this country, that you can let donors go. You can break up with donors, as we joked about when we were making this webinar. So take a look. If someone hasn't given to you in 5 years and they won't take a call from you, you probably want to drop them out of the major gift pool or drop them down, regardless of whether they are rated highly dollar-wise, or they gave you $50,000 5 years ago. If they're not calling and they're not giving any more, something happened. Certainly try and repair that relationship, but I wouldn't put a lot of focus on it. Talk about deactivating certain levels of people, just so they're not getting all the mailing all the time, or they're not going to be assigned to people purely that are new to the organization. Remember, we're talking about if you're gone and 3 years down the road, somebody is looking at this database, if you haven't created a deactivation code, or you haven't put a note in there that says this person is not going to give to us, stop focusing, then you are dooming the organization to repeating any mistakes that you might have made when you got there because you don't have that information. So we know you're going to collect everything possible. We know you're never going to delete someone from your CRM, but you definitely want to create a code that's going to say, let's ignore that person. Maybe they get one mailing a year, something like that. The last point is also very important. It's who has access or who can make notes or changes to your database. We jokingly said, you're not running a Wikipedia at your shop. So I was a frontline major gift officer. We like to think we know everything and make changes and notes and things like that to our prospects. You should really make sure that not everyone has the access to change ratings, to change how much they think somebody is worth, how much they think somebody can give. There should be some sort of rules in place, a set of guidelines, so that, again, you're not creating a Wikipedia where people can just go in and edit 3 years down the road when everyone's gone that was there and someone's reading that file, they're taking that as the gospel. So these are just suggestions that you should take if you have a large organization, a lot of constituents, to make sure that the next generation isn't repeating certain mistakes that could be easily avoided.
And I think with that, obviously having this good cleansing gives you a good starting point. And we've gone through who you're trying to talk to and why you're trying to talk to those people, but the actual process of how to obtain that data when you so need some additional data is an interesting process. And Brad had mentioned a few processes, if you will. But we wanted to, being the fiscally responsible people that we are, we wanted to offer some cost-effective, aka free, methods of obtaining information. Now again, I do want to stress that these methods, of course, are not scientific, A, and B, are also opportunities for you to quickly garner some information. Do not spend a lot of time in terms of, your bigger pool. These are people that you really want to get to know, or in the instance that we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, the social media aspects like Facebook and LinkedIn, it's really great to know who knows who and to be able to make a path through those people to approach them potentially. Obviously, we've all heard, probably have used, and probably have Googled ourselves, but so much so that Google has now become a verb. Google has a lot of advantages in terms of some of the basic information that you can obtain about a potential donor or a person of interest, if you will. And one of the things that I find interesting is that if the person has any sort of documentation on the web, meaning his or her name has been mentioned or cited, which a lot of times, especially for those bigger donors, they probably are likely to have been mentioned, you can set up a Google News alert so that you, again, are performing a well-rounded search, if you will, of the people in your area that you need to keep up with and be aware of. So I suggest putting that Google News alert as something for some of those bigger top donors. White Pages is the world's largest free people and business searchable database. And an interesting tip, and they should probably pay us for saying this, you can actually perform the reverse address lookup so that if you know your donor lives in a certain zip code, you can mail to his or her neighbors, assuming that it's a nice zip code and they probably have access to a little bit more funds similar to your already known donor. Then, of course, we move to Facebook, which everyone looks to in terms of ways to know who knows who or what have you. But another thing that sometimes might be very helpful is to look at the pages that a person has liked. This will give you obvious interest indicators. If someone has liked a lot of animal pages, you know, given Brad's example about the service dogs, it seems like it should be a relatively good fit and that you should look to cultivating them. And LinkedIn is similar to Facebook, but with a more professional and business approach. And again, the same thing applies, though. With LinkedIn, you can check out people's connections to see if they perhaps have worked with or know or have done business with a particular person. And again, there are also hobbies and interests indicated because LinkedIn has groups that people can join, users can join. And so that's very useful for doing some research. But the biggest and best way to do it, and that's what this symbol, this human person symbol is supposed to represent, is peer giving. And I know that it makes a tremendous amount of difference in terms of time and resources. At every organization that I've been with, we have sat down with our board members, with even our volunteers, of course, in separate situations, and we have gone through lists. And it's a very tedious process, but it is extremely, extremely helpful and profitable. And to go through and to indicate, well, this person knows this person, or I feel happy to talk to this particular person, or just to provide some basic information. As we know in this day and age, it's about who you know. And sometimes, I know in the case of where I came from before joining GG&A in Springfield, there was that pool, if you will, of about 30 people that everyone knew that gave to almost every organization. So if you have access to one of those 30, your organization was kind of shortlisted. And I think that this is great not only just for getting that data, but it's also a great tool and a great exercise for not only your staff, but for your board members and your volunteers to also become more engaged rather than just helping at an event or just writing those big checks. So I'm sure that Brad would echo me and really highlight the fact that peer giving is probably one of the most important things that you can do for your organization.
Oh, absolutely. The peer screening is phenomenal. And just to piggyback the Facebook and the Google a little bit more, and I've not stayed completely current on Facebook as far as the analytics behind it, but it is free to get target groups as far as if you know that your best donor is a 40-year-old single male, they can find everyone on Facebook that is a 40-year-old single male that lives in Omaha. So the tools that are behind these huge search engines or social networks that are free a lot of times are just fantastic for an organization that's looking for accumulating more names. And then I believe with Facebook you can also see how many times people go to your site and things like that. So if you find out that your best donors typically bang up against your Facebook page 15 times a week, you can find out who else is doing that. And so there are a lot of free options for finding out information via Facebook and Google about the people in your database. What I was going to talk about next was the non-free options. So we alluded to this a little bit about finding out age and addresses and things like that. So just so you know that walking away from the GG&A webinar, we're not telling you to go do a LinkedIn search on everybody in your database, because we know that's going to take a lot of time. Certainly do that for your best prospects, but and maybe that is the only way your organization has to get that information. I certainly understand that you wouldn't have funds to run a wealth screening or what I'm going to talk about. So we want to talk about the free options, but we also want you to know, going away from this, that once you've decided how you're going to segment and you've segmented your database and you've gotten this pool, you know who your best donors are. Now you want to see who's most likely to give to us, who are the wealthiest people, what are some of the characteristics we don't have on our donors. You can buy pretty much everything out there. If you are an organization that is targeting dog lovers, you could get the subscription list to Dog Fancy. So anything you want, anything you can possibly imagine, you can get purchase via one of these vendors. We typically focus on wealth screening in the philanthropic world because that's the data that's sort of driving our choices. So that's pretty popular. And 10 or 15 years ago when I was working in wealth screening, it was extremely expensive. But it is getting less and less expensive, almost, I would say, cheap to do a wealth screening for almost any organization of any size. So that's something you're going to want to think about as you're looking at your database and saying, well, who should we focus on? We have 7,000 people that give to us over the last 3 years. You know, where should we put a lot of our effort as far as the major gifts go? Something that is also very inexpensive that will give you a lot of information on the people in your database if you are a nonprofit that doesn't have this type of data. There are a lot of demographic overlays, meaning are people married? Do they have partners? Do they have children? What's their age range? What sort of income do they have? So this is inexpensive. It's usually at the household level or even the neighborhood level, and you can get it for almost pennies for your organization. And yes, it costs money, and I know most people don't have money when you're talking to the nonprofit world, but if you look at the time that it will take you to go through white pages, the time that it will take you to go through LinkedIn, Facebook, that time you can't get back. It does actually have a cost to it, so you can get a lot of this information with a pretty inexpensive demographic overlay. There are even places out there that will do all of the segmenting we're talking about for you. So you send them the names and addresses, the giving of your donors. They will send you back hundreds of charts, segmenting your database every which way you can possibly imagine to see how are the women giving, how are the married couples giving, how are the men, how are the people under 35. So if everything we've talked about so far is a little daunting to you, or you don't have the time to do that, there are organizations that will just do the segmenting. You don't even have to worry about overlays. If you're looking for a total solution, there are a lot of organizations or a lot of companies that will do modeling and segmenting and analytics. So that's really looking at the whole picture. They're going to do some sort of wealth identification. They're going to segment your data to see what makes up the best prospect and who else fits that mold. And they're going to segment your entire database that way and give you analytics on it. So you'll see planned giving, you'll see annual fund, you'll see membership if that's what you're interested in. You'll see major gift. And when you're talking to these people, you don't usually have to buy the whole project. If you're a museum, like Farah worked for, you don't have a major gift program. You are membership based. Say, you know, I only want the membership chart. I don't want all this other, I don't do planned gifts here at the Children's Museum. That's just not where we make our hay as far as fundraising. We just want membership. So you're the buyer, you're in charge. So realize that all of that is out there. We've tried to walk you through some simple ways and some cost-effective ways to get to a point where you're segmenting, you're using the data, you're collecting data for the next generation. But as far as now, if you don't have time for that, there's certainly a lot of firms out there that will do this for you. So this is still me. It's Brad. When I got to university, we were in a situation that I'm talking about where we hadn't had a good system in place for the previous 3 or 5 years, and so we were doomed to repeat the mistakes that have been made in front of us. We were almost an entirely new staff. So what I wanted to give you an example of is just a very rudimentary, not many moving parts system. What we did, we had a large database of 60 to 80,000 individuals. These are all alums, donors, friends, volunteers, everybody. And we did wealth screening and we did some segmentation and we pulled out of course, Oprah, as I've talked about numerous times. And we created a subset, so this isn't to scale. What we wanted to do was get about 5,000 people or so, a manageable number for our organization. It might be 500 for yours, it might be 200 for yours, but a pool that allowed us to treat these 5,000, and we actually did cutoffs based on wealth. We didn't just pick 5,000, but we knew we had a number in mind, to say, this is the group of people that I want to focus on. And we talked about, there was a proverb that we made up a few slides ago that said, money is better spent on a few communications with a small group than sending mailings to everybody in your database once. So we knew that money was an issue, so we were going to mail to the entire database, this database constituency, once a year. We knew that. But as far as ongoing, who are we going to invite to events? Who are we going to send a letter out that the president wrote? Who are we going to focus on for any mini campaign? We knew that that group was going to be the 5,000. We also knew from a major gift standpoint that we had 4 major gift officers. They could manage about 400 to 500 people. Traditionally, the major gift officers just kept their portfolios for years and years and years. We had set up monthly portfolio reviews so that if people hadn't been visited or hadn't responded in the previous 6 months, we pulled them out of the major gifts portfolio. And we needed an easy system, and we could see the squiggly arrows here of people going into the managed pool, people coming out of the managed pool. So when a major gift officer was in the room and said, well, now I've lost 15 people, I need to get my portfolio back up, we knew exactly where it was coming from. We didn't have to say to them, well, we'll get back to you on who we think you should manage. We had that list going from that 5,000. We also had indicators in our database system that said, these people aren't responding to major gift. So yes, they're rated highly. Yes, we want to keep them in this major gift pool so that they do get invited to events, they do get the specialized mailings, but do not let them get managed again, because they will just sit in the major gift officer's portfolio, and in 6 months we'll be pulling them back out, and they'll sit, and then they'll go back into somebody else. So again, this is a very simple system. We wanted to make sure that we segmented, and then when we had that smaller pool, that 5,000 or so, or whatever you want to call it, just the major gift, we called it high-end annual fund, because we knew it wasn't a major gift, it was more high-end annual fund. And this is where I'll refer you back to the communications webinar from about 5 months ago that Jeff Bradley and Bill O'Leary did with me, and they are part of a communications practice here at GG&A. They have great ideas on how to treat a group of 5,000 like they're individuals, and how to repurpose things like a president's report, something that you have to make for the board. And you have to spend all of this time and all of this effort on the 10 or 25 people that sit on your board of directors. Well, now you've got this document that you've spent a lot of time on, and it's worthwhile. How can I change that just a little bit, if at all, or slap a cover letter on it and send it out to these 5,000 to really make them feel like this organization values my opinion. They value me, that they're giving me the inside scoop on what's going on. I'm not saying send out your board reports to everybody if it's not appropriate, but those are the kind of ideas where you can take something that you did for a very small group that you had to do, and it was important, but repurpose it for a big group that you are cultivating for the long term. And again, it's a way to spend your money on a group that has the ability to give, that has shown the affinity for your organization to give, and you're not just blasting it out to 10,000 people, 9,000 of which haven't shown that they're going to give to you at any high level, and it's almost a waste of your money to print and mail, et cetera.
And I think with that, I'd like to recap and kind of piggyback on what Brad was saying in terms of, really using your resources wisely, and consider all of what we have said as investing your time for data. Data is basically your driving force, and it, again, is ultimately saving money for your organization to be utilized in a more effective way. I would like to take this moment to see if we have any questions. Catherine?
Yes, Sarah. A question was asked. Should the current economic environment affect who I keep on my existing donor list?
Well, yes. I mean, the economic environment for nonprofits is really always the same, I would say. I mean, you you are trying to serve a cause or an industry, so you should always view it as precious. I know that the last 3 years have been extremely challenging for raising money, and you probably have less of it, but the same ideas should always go forth, whether it's 2005 and 6 and everyone has lots and lots of money to spend on everything, but you should always be careful on how much money you are spending on raising money. I know that's certainly one of the metrics that a lot of people use to decide whether they're going to give to your nonprofit and at what level. So yes, the current economic conditions should drive your decisions because you probably have less money, but I think overall we should almost look at this as a Depression lesson to learn, that all those people that grew up during the Depression that won't spend money going forward, maybe that's something that all nonprofits can take out of this, to say, we were able to raise money on almost no budget in 2011, 2010, why can't we do it in 13? So.
And I think that just to add to that, the cost per dollar raised is so significant in such a, you really need to take note of that in terms of your organization. And to answer that question, you have to look at your overall, again, going back to looking 5 years back and seeing if your lapsed donors, your current donors, are they really varied, and also taking into account the cost per dollar raised. I think that will kind of guide you if you really boil down the numbers and not just look at the total number of donors or the total fundraising dollars. And I think that we're coming close to the end of our time together, but I did want to, first of all, extend a very warm thank you to Brad for co-presenting with me and to Catherine for setting this up. And as we had mentioned and hopefully piqued your interest at the beginning of the webinar, the last installment of our webinars for small shops is coming up on April 12th, Best Practices for Boards of Directors, and that will be presented by Lori Musgrove and myself. And hopefully we will offer you some tips and techniques on how to not only find the best board members for your organization, but to utilize them throughout their time with your organization. So we look forward to seeing you then. And again, just as a reminder, should you have any questions, we will stay on the line for about 15 minutes, excuse me, we'll stay online, not on the phone line, for about 15 more minutes. So feel free to send in your questions, and we will be happy to respond to them, as well as sending the webinar slides to all the participants today. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening.